Wonderful partnership, and I'm sure he learned a lot from her. He had a tremendous amount of contact with merchants coming from different parts of the world, passing through the Arabian Peninsula. I think he was a very intelligent man, very open-minded, and he was able to communicate with a great variety of peoples. He must have had great charisma as well.
Muhammad had a way with people and with resolving their disputes. Once, when the Kaaba fell into disrepair, the clan chieftains quarreled over who would have the honor of putting the sacred black stone back where it belonged. Before violence could erupt, Muhammad proposed an equitable solution. United in the effort, the four leaders shared the weight and the honor. In gratitude, they invited Muhammad himself to replace the sacred stone. He became known as Al-Amin, the trusted one.
There are all kinds of indications that he was tremendously interested in religious questions. This is obviously not something that an ordinary person probably was interested in those days.
He talked to sages, Arab sages. He talked to Jewish and Christian sages who lived in the area. He used to go up into the rock hills around Mecca and meditate, think about things. And at some point had this extraordinary vision, which is spoken about very evocatively and elusively.
In a cave above Mecca, Muhammad had an experience that would be the defining moment of his life. An angel was said to appear before him in the form of a man, instructing him to recite in the name of God, the Almighty. For Muhammad, it was an encounter as profound as it was deeply disturbing.
You get a sense of what it would be like to be a normal person in society, perhaps unusual in the sense of your intensity for things like social justice and finding out what the meaning of life is, but not being endowed with anything that would seem miraculous by your friends. And all of a sudden having this voice come to you and then come out of you as you speak it and recite it to other people. And that is the beginning of the prophetic career of Muhammad.
The months to come would bring more revelations. Powerful words of a lyrical quality, more beautiful than the most exquisite Arabic poetry. Above all, Muhammad was to bear one message to his people, a simple yet radical proclamation, that there is only one God.
The central tenet of Islam is the oneness, the indivisible unity of God. Not something that is simply that one pays lip service to, but something that is absolutely the most important concept.
Divine unity is more than saying there's only one God and there aren't other deities. It's only thinking about one thing. So to be thinking about possessions, to be thinking about status, to be thinking about power are all intellectual idols.
The implications were staggering. One God meant one people. No more tribal divisions. To the poor and unprotected, the prospect was revolutionary.
It seems to me that one of the most important things in his early teaching that isn't often talked about is the strong social justice message that he delivered. In Mecca of the time, there was an increasing separation between the haves and the have-nots. He insisted that this was not to be and that we should share the wealth. And it was this social justice message that I think that really got him a hearing among many of the folks.
So coming with Islam, it was a new order, a new way of life. And it was a beautiful way of life because everybody was equal, black, white, men, women, children. So it had that type of universal appeal, which I think was the reason why Islam spread so rapidly.
Many were moved by Muhammad's message as he began to speak out in the community.
It had the suppleness and symbolic depth of the great pre-Islamic poems that had been created by this people and that had given this people in Arabia such an extraordinary ear for verbal expression, where verbal expression was the commanding cultural force. Some people called him a poet, and there's a Quranic surah basically saying, Muhammad is not a poet. Poets speak through desire. This is not the voice of desire, this is the voice of God.
Muhammad's following began to grow. They called themselves Muslims, for those who surrender to God. They set out to preserve the message Muhammad had brought. This was the beginning of the Quran.
The Quran was revealed orally. But very soon people realized that it had to be written down in order to make sure that it wasn't corrupted and that the original message was maintained. And from a very early date, and it's very unclear when that date was, because no early manuscripts of the Quran survive, people began copying it down.
The Quran is a revelation of spiritual teaching, of both ethical and social guidance. It was revealed and remains in Arabic.
What's so extraordinary about the Quran is its naturalness, so that it can say the most powerful cosmic things with a sense of intimacy, so that power and tenderness come together constantly in the Quranic language.
With words alone, the Quran delivers its vision to the faithful. Its imagery conjures a picture of the afterlife that resonates with all the power of traditional Bedouin poetry.
Imagine yourself in the desert, surrounded by dust, by the glare of the sun. You wear cloaks to cover your body because the wind will just sear your skin right off your face. And you walk into an oasis. The temperature drops dramatically. There's a quiet there. The wind is no longer howling. Everywhere you look, you see green and color. The world of water and paradise are symbolically tied to one another. And the Quran can conjure that up with just a few briefly chosen words.
Yet for all the imagery of paradise in the Quran, there was no easy description of God. The mystery would remain.
It's very difficult to talk about God without reifying God. Reifying to make God into a thing, or anthropomorphizing God, to make God into a projection of our own human self. And that's why Muslims don't like sculpture, for example, traditionally, because they believe that there's that danger. And the Quran avoids that by constantly shifting the pronouns, so we can't really reify God and get an image, a physical image of God.
Rather than a physical image of God or of Muhammad, it is the beauty of the Quran itself that is celebrated in Islam.
Islam developed in this context where pictures were not favored. The Quran, as it was revealed, was God's representation on earth, and Muslims felt from a very early time that the only just representation of God's word, was the Quran itself, not any picture of God, certainly not, because you couldn't represent God, and certainly not a picture of Muhammad, because he wasn't divine. At certain times and places, people did make images of the Prophet Muhammad, but these are not religious images. These are not images meant to be worshipped. They're not images of a saint or of God. They are images of Muhammad as a historical figure. He's sort of given honor by having a very bright blue background or a white cloud near him, but he's not otherwise distinguished from the other characters in the story. At other times, people did represent the Prophet, but he was always represented with a white cloth over his face to hide his face, so that there were different approaches to doing this. But in all of these are not devotional images. You're not supposed to look at them and pray towards them. You're to learn more about the history of your religion, with the emphasis on history from them.
As Muhammad's community grew, so did the opposition.
People, of course, were skeptical and said, look, if you're a prophet, where's your miracle? And the prophets in the Quran, Moses had miracles, Jesus had miracles. Where's your miracle? The Quranic answer to that challenge is, this is the miracle, this Quran.
But that wasn't miracle enough for the people who defined themselves by the gods of their ancestors and the totems of their tribe. Their doubts increased. The idea of life after death appalled them.
So the Quran presents people as really being skeptical. You mean to tell me that after I die and my body has gone back to the elements and I've been putrefied, that I'm going to be put back together again and brought back to life? That, of any of the messages in the Quran, that struck the people of Arabia as being the most hard to believe.
Muhammad also spoke of eternal damnation for the unjust.
He used the language of apocalyptic imagery, talking about the signs of the ends of time, when the mountains crumble, when the skies are rolled up like scrolls. Then you will know what responsibility you bear for your actions.
There are references to those who are unjust going to the fire.
To the non-believers, the divine reckoning Muhammad invoked was an outrage. His dismantling of their heritage and customs, deeply unsettling.
It was a threat in several ways, to their social order, to their age-old traditions, and an economic threat because of the importance of the pilgrimage shrine of the Kaaba in Mecca.
As